Back in 1967, something happened in America that you almost never see anymore. Something quiet, something that didn't make the evening news, didn't get photographed for a magazine, didn't get talked about at City Hall. But it was one of the most powerful things that ever existed in this country. When hard times hit a family, and hard times hit everybody sooner or later, the neighbors showed up. Not with a card, not with a phone call, with food, real food, a casserole still warm from the oven, a pot of soup, a pie wrapped in a dish towel, a loaf of bread still soft from the morning. They just showed up. And that, my friends, was America. Can you imagine that? Just think about it for a moment. You didn't have to post anything. You didn't have to announce anything. You didn't have to set up a GoFundMe page or send out a group message. Word traveled the old-fashioned way, mouth to mouth, porch to porch, across the back fence, through the church bulletin, and before you knew it, your kitchen counter was full, your refrigerator was packed, and the people who filled it were already gone because they didn't want to make a fuss. They didn't want you to feel embarrassed. They just wanted you to eat. That's just how it was. Lord have mercy, how different things were. In 1967, your neighbors knew your name. They knew your kids' names. They knew which car was yours and what time you usually left for work in the morning. They knew if your husband had been laid off because they'd noticed the car was home when it shouldn't be. They knew if your wife had been taken to the hospital because the lights had been on at 3 in the morning and there'd been a strange car in the driveway. They noticed. That's the word. They noticed. And noticing was an act of love. Now, let me take you back there. Really take you back. It's 1967. The Vietnam War is tearing the country in two. Young men are getting draft notices in the mailbox. Walter Cronkite is telling you every night how many were lost that week. Families are worried sick. And right here at home, on your street, life is going on the way it always does. A little harder for some, a little easier for others, but always together. The neighborhood is not just a place where you sleep. It's a living thing. It breathes, it watches, it takes care of its own. Picture the street. It doesn't matter if it's in Ohio or Alabama, in Minnesota or Tennessee, in a mill town or a farming community. The houses are close together. The yards are small but tended. There's a clothesline out back with sheets on it. There's a screen door on the front that squeaks when it opens. The kids are outside, always outside, and they carry news between houses faster than any telephone ever could. Mrs. Henderson's baby is sick. Mr. Kowalski lost his job at the plant. The Martins' daddy got hurt on the job. Word traveled, and word traveled fast. And here is what happened next. Here's the part that I want you to hold on to. Within a day, sometimes within hours, a woman from down the street would show up at the door. She wouldn't ring the bell twice. She wouldn't stay long enough to be a burden. She'd come with something in her hands, something wrapped in foil or covered with a dish towel, and she'd hand it over with a few simple words. We had a little extra. I made too much. Just something for tonight. Nobody needed to make a big deal about it because making a big deal would have embarrassed the family, and dignity mattered. Dignity was something you protected in other people, same as you'd want yours protected. Shoot, back then people understood something that we maybe lost sight of today. They understood that hard times were not a character flaw. Hard times were just life. Everybody had them. The man who brought you a ham today might need a pot of beans from you 6 months from now. Nobody was above it. Nobody was below it. It was the great equalizer. Not suffering itself, but the response to suffering, the way people chose to show up for each other. Plain and simple. That's America right there. And you know what was remarkable? The women who made those dishes, and it was mostly women because in 1967, the kitchen was where women did their quiet and powerful work. They didn't make a lesser version of what they'd normally cook. They didn't pull out the cheap ingredients. No, they sent their best. If they had a recipe they were proud of, that was the one they made. Because when you cook for someone in trouble, you put yourself into it. You put your love and your prayer and your hope right into that pot. And somehow the family on the receiving end could taste it. They really could. Now let me tell you about a family. A real kind of family, the kind you knew on every block. Let's call them the Harmons. Dad worked at a factory, Mom stayed home with 3 kids, and stretched $1 so far it was see-through by the end of the week. They were fine. Not rich, never rich, but fine. Until one Tuesday morning when Dad slipped on a wet floor at the plant and broke his arm in 2 places. Just like that. No more paycheck. A week of bills already stacked on the kitchen table, and the cold certainty that they were one bad month away from real trouble. Mom sat at the kitchen table that first night after the kids were in bed, and she did the math. She did the math the way millions of American mothers did it in those years, quietly, alone, pencil on paper, numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times you rearranged them. It was a hollow feeling. A scared feeling, the kind you keep to yourself so the kids don't catch it. She went to bed without crying because she didn't want to wake anyone up. She stared at the ceiling and she prayed the way you pray when you're not sure anybody's listening, but you pray anyway, because what else are you going to do? And then Wednesday morning came. There was a knock at the door before 9 o'clock. It was the woman from 2 houses down, Mrs. Beaumont, holding a pot of chicken and dumplings with a dish towel wrapped around the handles so it wouldn't burn her hands. "Heard about your husband," she said. "Hope he's on the mend." That was it. She handed it over, turned around, and walked back down the porch steps. No big speech, no lingering, no making the other woman feel small, just the pot, the chicken, and the unspoken message that said, "You are not alone." By Thursday, there were 3 more dishes on the counter. A neighbor from the church brought deviled eggs and a plate of cold cuts. The man from the corner house, big quiet fellow, nobody talked too much, left a loaf of his wife's white bread on the porch without even knocking. 2 ladies from the PTA sent their kids over with a covered dish of scalloped potatoes and a jar of green beans they'd put up themselves in the summer. The refrigerator was full. The counter was full. The family was not going to go hungry. Not tonight. Not this week. And somehow that knowledge, that simple, physical, practical knowledge, made the fear a little smaller, made the ceiling a little less frightening to stare at. You see, that's the thing about food. It's not just fuel. It never was. When somebody brings you food in a hard time, they're telling you something. They're saying your life has value. Your family matters. You are seen. You are not invisible. You are part of something. And in 1967, in America, that message was delivered in cast iron pots and covered Pyrex dishes and mason jars of homemade preserves. It was one of the most eloquent languages ever spoken, and almost nobody called it anything. They just called it being neighborly. And here's the thing. Here's the part that really gets me when I think about it. The families who received that food never forgot. Never. Decades later, those grown-up children, the ones who were 6 or 7 years old when all of this happened, they still remembered. They remembered Mrs. Beaumont's chicken and dumplings. They remembered the smell of it, the warmth of it, the way their mother's face looked when she opened that door and saw the pot in those hands. They remembered that it meant something, that it was more than food. It was the world saying, "Hold on, you're going to be all right." Now, this wasn't just one family. This was every family across every town in America. This is what communities did. And it wasn't organized. It wasn't a committee. There was no sign-up sheet, no coordination meeting, no email chain. There was just a neighborhood that knew itself, that knew its own. People who had lived side by side long enough to feel what the other was going through. long enough to know when to knock and when to leave the dish on the porch, long enough to understand that sometimes the greatest gift you can give another person is to let them keep their pride intact while you feed their children. Back in those days, people stayed. They stayed in their towns, stayed on their streets, stayed in their communities for years and years and years. The same families on the same block, decade after decade. You watched your neighbors' kids grow up. You were there when babies came home from the hospital and when old men were carried out the front door for the last time. You knew the whole arc of a person's life, and because you knew it, you felt responsible for it in some way. Not legally, not officially, just humanly. You were responsible to each other the way you're responsible to the people you love. I'll tell you what, it wasn't perfect. Let's be honest, 1967 was not some paradise. There was real poverty. There was real injustice. The civil rights movement was showing America the things it needed to change, and it was right to demand those changes. The country was struggling, but inside those struggles, inside that imperfect and often unjust America, there was this other thing too, this human thing, this showing up with food thing. And it was real. It was as real as anything that ever happened in this country. It was the part of America that deserved to survive. And sometimes I wonder if we've taken good enough care of it. Let me tell you about what it felt like to be the child in that house, because there were always children watching. Always little eyes taking in everything the adults were doing, even when the adults thought no one was paying attention. Kids in 1967 were like little sponges. They absorbed it all. The worry in their parents' eyes, the quiet arguments about bills, the way mom would stare at the refrigerator for too long before closing it without taking anything out. They knew. Kids always know. But they also saw the other thing. They saw the knock on the door. They saw their mother's face change when she opened it. They saw the pot handed over, the few quiet words, the neighbor turning and walking away. And something registered, something deep and permanent, some understanding of what human beings can be to each other, what they can do for each other, just by taking the time to cook a meal and carry it down the street. That understanding didn't go away. It grew up with those children. It became part of who they were. And when those children grew up and had families of their own, they knew what to do when a neighbor's light was on at 3 a.m. They knew what to do when the car stayed in the driveway for too many days. They made the casserole. They made the soup. They wrapped up the bread. They carried it down and knocked on the door and said, "I had a little extra," even when they hadn't, even when they'd made it specifically for the purpose of bringing it over, because they knew the person on the other side of that door needed it to feel like a gift and not a charity. They learned that from watching. They learned it from being the children in the house when the neighbors showed up. That's how these things get passed on. That's how they survive. Lord have mercy, I think about that code sometimes. I think about how much it protected people, not just their bodies, not just their hunger, but their sense of who they were, their dignity. In 1967, a man who needed help still needed to feel like a man. A woman who was struggling still needed to feel like she was running her household. And the community knew how to give help in a way that honored those feelings. They understood the psychology of it intuitively, not because they'd read any books about it, because they were paying attention to each other. Genuine, careful, loving attention. And the church. Oh, the church was at the center of all of this. It doesn't matter which church, Catholic, Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, Pentecostal, it didn't matter. The church was where the network lived, where information traveled, where casseroles were organized without anyone officially organizing them. The pastor knew, the deacons knew, the women's circle knew. And the women's circle, hand to God, the women's circle in any American church in 1967 was one of the most efficient and compassionate organizations on earth. They had it all handled before you even knew you needed help. They had a list, they had a system, they had been doing this since before any of us were born, and they would keep doing it long after. You'd see them at the potluck, big tables pushed together in the fellowship hall, covered end to end with dishes. Every family brought something, every family took something home. And somehow it always worked out. Somehow there was always enough, and sometimes more than enough. I don't know how they did it on those budgets. I truly don't. But I've stopped trying to explain it and started just calling it what it was. Grace. Plain American grace. And the recipes that traveled from house to house and church to church during those years, they weren't written down in cookbooks. They were written on index cards with smeared ink, or not written down at all, just known, kept in memory, passed from mother to daughter across a kitchen counter on a Sunday afternoon. Now you want to add a little more butter than you think you need. Don't let it cook too fast or the crust gets tough. A little bit of vinegar in the beans, that's the secret. These recipes were a kind of heritage, a kind of scripture. They carried the love of the women who made them, and they fed people in hard times for generations. Think about what's different now. I'm not saying it to be harsh about today. I'm not one for living backwards, and I know that every generation has its gifts. But think about it honestly. Today, when someone in the neighborhood has a hard time, what happens? Maybe a text message, maybe a like on a post, maybe someone shares a fundraising link. And those things mean something. Of course they do. People are trying, people are generous, but it is different. It is different from someone standing at your door in the cold with a pot of soup in their hands. It is different from that smell, that warmth, that human face looking at you and saying without words, "I see you, I'm here." We lost something when we stopped knowing our neighbors' names, when the blocks got quieter and the front porches stopped being used and everybody came and went from their garages with the doors closing behind them. We lost the network, the living, breathing, food-delivering network of human care that held families together during the hard times. And I think that loss is one of the quiet griefs of American life, one that we don't talk about enough because it's hard to name something you're not sure you remember clearly enough to mourn. But here's what gives me hope. Here's what I hold on to. That instinct never died. It's still in us. You see it in disasters, floods, fires, tornadoes, when strangers show up with food and water and tools. You see it in neighborhoods that still have that old closeness, the ones where people sit on their porches and know each other's business and show up when it matters. You see it in the people who learned it as children, who were in that house in 1967 when the knock came, who watched their mother open the door and receive that pot of chicken and dumplings with shaking hands and a grateful heart. Those people carry it forward. They always have. You know what I mean? This is not a lost cause. This is a dormant thing, not a dead thing. The capacity for this kind of community, this food-bearing, neighbor-knowing, porch-sitting, showing-up kind of community, it's still there in us. It's in our DNA. It's what we're built for. Human beings are not meant to go through the hard times alone. We never were. And deep down, we all know it. We feel it on the days when things go wrong and the house is quiet and we wish someone would just knock on the door. So maybe that's the real story of 1967. Not just the Vietnam protests, not just the Summer of Love, not just the muscle cars and the AM radio and Walter Cronkite at 6 o'clock. The real story is also this. A woman in Ohio or Georgia or California or Wisconsin putting on her coat on a cold November morning and picking up a dish from the stove and walking down the block to a house where she knew things were hard. That woman didn't make the history books. She never will. But she made something. She made a family feel less alone on a hard night. She made a child believe at the deepest level that the world was a place where people showed up for each other. And that child grew up and passed it on. And that is a kind of history that matters. That, honest to goodness, is the kind of history that holds a country together. I want you to hold that image. Hold it the way you'd hold something fragile and precious. The woman at the door with the pot in her hands. The warm smell drifting in from the cold air, the mother's face, the relief in it, the gratitude that went deeper than words, the child watching from the hallway. That's America, my friends. That's the America that lived between the headlines. That's the one that kept going when everything else was hard. We didn't know it then, but we were living through something rare, something that would be harder to find as the decades went by. The closeness, the knowing, the watching out for each other without being asked. Lord, those were different times. Not easier in every way, they were often harder in the ways that matter most. Money was tight, health care was scarce, the world was uncertain, and America was changing fast in ways that frightened people. But in the middle of all that, on the ordinary streets of ordinary towns, there was this: the casserole on the counter, the bread on the porch, the neighbor who showed up because she noticed. Because she noticed. That's just how it was. And you know what? There was something beautiful about that. Something beautiful about living in a community that understood without explanation what you owed to the person next door, what you owed to the family down the street. Not legally, not officially, just humanly, just as a member of something larger than yourself. Isn't that what community really means? Not a location, not a zip code, not a subdivision with a nice name. A group of people who show up, who bring food, who knock on the door when they know things are hard. That's a community. And in 1967, you could find one on almost every block in America. We didn't understand it back then. We didn't understand how precious it was, because you can never see the value of a thing clearly until you're looking back at it from a distance. Now we understand. Now we get it completely. And what we understand is that the woman with the pot, whoever she was, whatever street she lived on, whatever her name, she was doing one of the most important things a human being can do. She was saying, "You matter. Your hunger matters. Your fear matters. I see you, and I am not going to walk past and pretend I don't." Well, I hope this story touched your heart. I hope it brought back something, a memory of your own maybe, or a story your parents or grandparents told you around the kitchen table. Maybe you were one of those children watching from the hallway. Maybe you were the one who brought the dish. Maybe you received something like this in your own life and never quite found the words for what it meant. These stories need to be kept alive. They remind us who we are. They remind us what we're capable of at our best when we're paying attention to each other. These are the stories that hold us together. And if you're watching this and you've got a neighbor you haven't checked on in a while, a family you know is going through something hard, maybe this is the sign. Make the soup, bake the bread, wrap it up and walk it down and knock on that door. Say, "I had a little extra." Watch what happens to their face. Watch what it does to yours. Because that thing, that old American thing, it's still in you. It never left. It's just waiting to be used. If this video meant something to you, go ahead and hit that like button. Leave a comment down below. Tell me if you remember something like this from your own life, or if your folks ever told you stories like these. Did your neighbors show up for your family in hard times? Did your family show up for someone else? I want to hear it. Every story matters, and this community of ours is built on them. Share this video with someone who could use a little reminder of what neighbors used to be. And subscribe so you never miss a story, because we've got plenty more where this came from, and every single one of them is worth remembering. Take care of yourselves, folks. Take care of each other, and we'll see you in the next story.